light will indicate that it's on. Good morning to everyone, and I'd like to welcome those who are present here as well as the viewing and listening audience. So this is the 47th meeting of the Joint Select Committee on Land and Physical Infrastructure, pursuant to an inquiry into flood alleviation and control measures for major river basins and drainage catchments in Trinidad and Tobago. Just a couple of reminders is please, regarding your cell phones, if you can please turn them off or place them on silent or vibrate. I'd also like to indicate that this hearing is being broadcast live on Parliament Channel 11, Parliament Radio 105.5 FM, and the Parliament's YouTube channel, PALView. And inform members of the viewing and listening audience that you can send in your comments via email to pal101@ttparliament.org or our Facebook page at facebook.com/ttparliament or on Twitter at @ttparliament. I'd like to welcome the officials of the Ministry of Public Utilities, Ministry of Planning and Development, Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government, Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and the Environment of the Tobago House of Assembly, and the Faculty of Engineering, UWI, St. Augustine. Please, I'd just like to extend an apology to all of you. It's a bit cramped this morning because we have been shifted from the Hamilton Morris room where we would normally meet at this venue due to the room being used for other purposes. So if you please bear with us and work along with us regarding this inquiry. Let me introduce myself. I'm Derup Timal. I'm the chairman of this Joint Select Committee, and I'll invite other members to introduce themselves at this time.
Good morning. Rushton Parry, Vice Chairman.
Good morning, Nigel DeFreitas, member.
Thank you, members. I'd just like to remind everyone of the objectives of this particular inquiry. We have three overarching objectives. One is to examine the current policies and measures for flood alleviation and control measures for major river basins and drainage catchments. Two, to examine the effectiveness of policies and initiatives for flood alleviation and control measures. And three, to determine the challenges associated with flood alleviation and control. So at this time, I would like to invite all officials who have gathered here this morning at our invitation to introduce yourselves and ask each entity for brief opening remarks, brief opening comments. So maybe we can start with Ministry of Public Utilities.
Good morning. My name is Beverly Khan. I'm the Deputy Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Public Utilities.
Good morning. I am Nicolette Duke, Acting Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Public Utilities. Morning. I am Marie Hines, the Acting Director of the Town and Country Planning Division, under the purview of the Ministry of Planning and Development.
Good morning. My name is Joanne Deoraj, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Planning and Development.
Good morning. I am Destra Bascom, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government.
Pleasant morning. I'm Richard Toppe, Administrator at the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and the Environment.
Good morning, Chairman, members. My name is Councillor Kwesi Devine, Secretary from the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and the Environment, and Lead of Assembly Business in the Tobago House of Assembly.
Good morning. I'm Vincent Cooper, Lecturer, Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering, UE.
Good morning. I'm Kenneth Kerr, Chief Climatologist Acting, Ministry of Public Utilities.
Good morning. I am Erica Campbell, Senior Land Use Planner in the Ministry of Planning and Development, Town and Country Planning Division.
Good morning. I am Raymond C. Paul, Acting Deputy Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government.
President, good morning. I'm Jamil Chidi Amiral, Acting Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government.
Good morning. I'm Howard Robin, Climate Change Specialist, Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and the Environment, Tobago House of Assembly.
A pleasant good morning. I am Abdallah Chadban, the Senior Technical Coordinator for the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and Environment of the THA.
Good morning. Ansel Kirk, Assistant Coordinator, Ministry of Planning and Development, the Town and Country Planning Division.
Good morning. Camille Gishard, Acting Assistant Director, Ministry of Planning and Development, Town and Country Planning Division.
Pleasant morning. David Manswell, General Manager, Communication, Sales and Marketing, SWIMCAL, under the Ministry of Public Utilities.
Good morning. Keith Mead, Senior Manager, Water Resources Agency of WASA, under the Ministry of Public Utilities.
Good morning. Sahid Shah, Technical Officer, Acting Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government.
Good morning. I'm Jerry David, the Senior Disaster Management Coordinator at the Ministry of Rural Development and the Local Government.
Okay, thank you. So we'll start with the Ministry of Public Utilities in terms of opening remarks.
Good morning, Chairman, Vice Chairman, and members. The Ministry of Public Utilities welcomes this opportunity to discuss and share with the national community how the Ministry engages its role in the collaborative effort to address this very important issue. Agencies under the Ministry's remit, and particularly the Water Resources Agency of the Water and Sewerage Authority, the Meteorological Services Division, and the Trinidad and Tobago Solid Waste Management Company, SWIMCAL, execute critical responsibilities throughout the flood alleviation and control cycle, from prevention and preparedness, response and mitigation, to rehabilitation and recovery. The Water Resources Agency is charged with the responsibility for management of the country's water resources, which includes the monitoring of rainfall, surface water, and groundwater systems. The agency has a real-time monitoring system that comprises rainfall and stream flow stations. Data from this system is provided to organizations such as the Met Services and the ODPM for consideration in the issuance of alerts and warnings. The WRA is currently implementing 2 programs geared towards flood alleviation. The first is the Adopt a River program, which is an integrated water resources management initiative that actively engages the participation of a range of stakeholders, including regional corporations, academic institutions, community-based organizations, and non-governmental organizations throughout Trinidad and Tobago in the protection and management of the nation's watersheds and rivers. The second program, geared towards flood alleviation, is the Community Flood Early Warning System, which is being implemented by the WRA in partnership with the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government and the Trinidad and Tobago Red Cross Society. This effort is intended to reduce the vulnerability of communities that are susceptible to flooding by providing near real-time information on rising water levels using a web-based data and notification portal. It should be noted that this application is in the beta phase, and once completed, will provide near real-time rainfall data, river levels, and reservoir information. The information would be shared with the respective municipal and regional corporations and other key stakeholders such as the ODPM and the Met Services, the Drainage and Highways divisions of the Ministry of Works and Transport, and community groups. These entities will be trained in how to analyze and interpret the data and how to respond based on the level of alert. As the agency with responsibility to provide early warnings, which are used to initiate flood preparedness, the Meteorological Services Division, starting in 2015, operationalized a National Climate Outlook Forum, or NCOF, which is provided ahead of wet seasons to shift the actions of key stakeholders from one of response to preparedness. The NCOF is an international best practice of the Global Framework for Climate Services and brings together the Met Services and key agencies such as the Drainage Division, the WRA, WASA, ODPM, the Tobago Emergency Management Agency, TEMA, and the disaster management units of the regional and municipal corporations. It should also be noted that the Trinidad and Tobago Solid Waste Management Company Limited continues to successfully partner with civil society and the private sector to implement a number of public education programs. These programs are aimed at reducing the impacts of flooding by raising environmental awareness to reduce littering and eradicate waste from communities. Additionally, SWIMCAL closely monitors the pre-warning flood alerts and prepares the landfills to receive post-flood debris if significant flooding is predicted. The Ministry of Public Utilities therefore looks forward to today's conversation and the recommendations of the committee and the other partners and stakeholders gathered here today to foster increased collaboration and generate additional suggestions for successfully meeting the challenges posed for flood alleviation and mitigation in the country.
Thank you, Ms. Duke. Before we go to the other entities, I'll just like to kindly request that what happened, we have your detailed responses to our questions, and a lot of the information that you would probably look to provide in the opening comments would have been covered already in some of the written responses. So in the interest of time, because we do have limited time, it's that if you keep your opening remarks as brief as possible, so that it allows us a lot more time for interaction through questions from members of the committee. So Ministry of Planning and Development.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members, and for the opportunity to appear before the Joint Select Committee today on, of course, land and physical infrastructure. We are happy to assist you in this inquiry into flood alleviation and control measures for major rivers, basins, and drainage catchments in Trinidad and Tobago. As you know, the Ministry of Planning and Development is responsible for the National Development Strategy, Vision 2030, and placing the environment at the center of social and economic development is one of our primary objectives. To effect this initiative, there is, of course, the environmental management and several other entities within the Ministry of Planning, but one of our key agencies that will be responsible for this is the Town and Country Planning Division, which derives its mandate from the Town and Country Planning Act, Chapter 3501. This division has responsibility on behalf of the Minister of Planning and Development to guide the orderly and progressive development of land in both urban and rural areas, and to preserve and improve amenities thereof. The Planning and Facilitation of Development Act 2018, when fully proclaimed, will cause Chapter 3501 to be repealed. The Ministry of Planning and Development and the Town and Country Planning Division are conscious of the potential impacts of flooding and various communities in Trinidad and Tobago, and has been working with several of its development partners to implement policies and standards to be able to guide the development of the built infrastructure of Trinidad and Tobago. One of the key initiatives that the Ministry of Planning has undertaken is that of the construction permitting process, which is an automated-based initiative which will allow for us to guide the development of applicants in terms of the infrastructure and where not to construct built infrastructure. Among other things, the project is also intended to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the Town and Country Planning Division and will automate the processes for the submission of application. We also, with the passage of the local government reform, this activity will also be shared with and effected by the local government entities. The division looks forward to the potential enhancement of the process development, planning, control, and management to the full proclamation of the Planning and Facilitation Act of 2014, the passage of the Urban and Regional Planning Profession Bill, and of course the ultimate devolution of land use planning functions to the municipal corporations. The role of interagency coordination is critical for us to address the issue of flooding and land regulation, and we hope that this process today will even heighten that important agenda. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. Thank you very much for allowing us the opportunity to discuss such an important issue, flood alleviation, which impacts our society, social, economic, and psychological. Flooding is everybody's business, and we cannot, as a ministry, view it as business as usual, but as business unusual, meaning that we need to devise new strategies in order to alleviate some of the problems our citizens are facing. At the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government, together with the 14 municipal corporations, we have spent millions of dollars completing a number of projects under our drainage and irrigation program. And we have also seen an increase in our allocations for fiscal 2019-2020. Flood alleviation, ladies and gentlemen, needs a whole of government approach and a whole of society approach. No one agency cannot do it alone. On last Tuesday, we heard about the wonderful work being done by the Ministry of Works and Transport, and I'm pleased that we have assembled a number of the stakeholders here today, so we can have our own list on speed dial. We will do a list when we are finished, because climate change is ensuring that there's high-intensity rainfall in a short period. So obviously, as ministries and departments, we have to do things differently. Whether we at our ministry are looking at legislation and enforcement of legislation, culture change, education and awareness building, provision of facilities such as dustbins within the city, we need to do things differently. Thank you again, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Ms. Bascom. The Tobago House of Assembly.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. I recognize I may be the thorn amongst the roses in here now as the only politician among the honorable public servants. However, I'm pleased to represent the Tobago House of Assembly, of course, the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries, and the Environment. Under a new mandate in 2017, it's the first time we saw that the Department of Environment was paired with the Department of Infrastructure. And it was out of the recognition that we have to do things differently, as our colleague would have said previously, business as unusual. To that extent, we would have set about, for the first time, establishing a coastal zone management unit under the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries, and the Environment. We would have also established a drainage task force out of a recognition that we need to do things differently as it regards our drainage network on the island. We would have established and continue to work with the Tobago Infrastructure Development Committee and the Tobago Disaster Management Committee. All of this is out of an abundance of caution, firstly, and out of a recognition that we have a responsibility to the people of Tobago to provide policy oversight and, of course, the necessary support as we deal with the impact of climate change. We look at the reality of increased rainfall, as was mentioned before. During the passage of Tropical Storm Karen, we would have received over a 20-hour period, 2/3 of the 30-year average for the month of September during that 20-hour period. So it means that we have real challenges that are greater than just one unit. And as such, we recognize the importance of collaboration with multiple stakeholders through all sectors of society, civil society, and of course, the business sector, as we seek to deal with some of the challenges that we face. To that end, as well, we have regarded or realized that we cannot continue with gray solutions only, gray engineering solutions, but we have also implemented green solutions, such as our reforestation programs, a deliberate attempt to reduce our carbon footprint, wetland management or co-management and rehabilitation, and policing and greater policing of illegal mining and land clearance. The Tobago House of Assembly is very grateful for this opportunity to sit here as we discuss the way forward, and I'm sure that at the end of this session, we can definitely see a path forward that can benefit not only the people of Trinidad and Tobago, but of course the people of Tobago specifically, because we recognize that we cannot be insular in our approach, and we must collaborate to benefit each and every person in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The UE is grateful for this invitation to participate in working with other stakeholders to develop flood resilience within the country. Civil and Engineering Department's particular role is in training professionals in hydrologic and hydraulic modeling for developing predictive tools that can be used for designing systems for flood mitigation. We, however, are fully aware that such is but a part of the requirements for building flood resilience, and that inputs and information from other disciplines are needed. Such professionals are available in other departments of the university, and I am sure that they will be very willing to contribute to solving this national problem. I also want to add that an important component is the education of the public insofar as for informing them of expectations in the near future, advising them on how to prepare, and letting them know of their role in minimizing adverse consequences due to flooding. And lastly, but not of least importance, the problem cannot be adequately tackled without physical and hydrometeorological data of sound quality and freely available to the public. So efforts should be made to ensure that the agencies responsible for the required data are supplied with adequate resources. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Cooper. Just like those of you who are seated in the second and third rows, when you are speaking, we would like you to just, for the purposes of the Hansard, we'd like you to mention your name first, and then do your talking for the second and third rows. Otherwise, for those at the front, it's okay to just start and continue. I would just like to get the ball rolling in terms of particularly the Ministry of Planning and Development. And in your responses to us, what we are gathering is that as part of the Vision 2030 National Development Strategy for 2016-2030, under the theme Improving Productivity Through Quality Infrastructure and Transportation, there is reference made to the development of an integrated flood management plan. And particularly the strategies is to maintain or augment the productivity of floodplains while providing protective measures against losses due to flooding. In this regard of the integrated flood management plan, I would just like to ask specifically, where are we with this, one, and who is taking the lead role in this integrated flood management plan? Which entity is the leading agency in this regard?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the issue of flood mitigation is part of the Vision 2030, and we have been in discussions with a number of agencies for different components of it. And unfortunately, I cannot say that we take the direct lead in terms of the whole plan, but it's the Drainage Division will deal with the actual physical infrastructure. But we have also been working with several of the other entities to deal with regional issues. For example, we've just started an initiative with one of the regional corporations, and we've also been working on the environmental aspect with the environmental issues as relates to forestry and managing of the beverage containers and the plastics. So there's a number of interventions in terms of when we look at an integrated water management plan. But we have no one agency that is going to be dealing with all of the components. So it's really about all the different entities handling it. But the Ministry of Planning and Development continues to take the overarching responsibility to monitor the implementation of all the different components of this integrated plan.
In terms of it all coming together, I mean, definitely you're looking at somebody saying, yes, this is our responsibility, we're taking charge of it, setting up the necessary project teams and whatever, and coordinating with all the agencies in terms of meeting regularly and all of that. Is the Ministry of Planning and Development
that is
taking up such, that's your responsibility?
Yes. And it is normally handled at the level of the policy agenda, as well as the budgeting for it under the Public Sector Investment Program. So we would have sight of all the different initiatives and condense it as to whether we are in fact achieving the flood alleviation agenda. So yes, that is really our role as the Ministry of Planning and Development.
Can I ask, do you have is there a specific unit within your ministry or a specific project team? Do you have that set up per se?
No, we do not have that set up. It is really handled at the level of our policy, our budgeting, and of course our monitoring and evaluation unit, looking at the implementation of the National Development Strategy. But we take your recommendation.
Yeah. No, my
Mr. Chair,
thoughts are
yes.
something as I mean, because if you are the lead entity, and you're coordinating with so many other ministries and agencies, and this is to be the overarching flood management plan per se, to look at not only mitigation but alleviation and all other aspects of the stormwater management. If you are thinking about going to that stage, if it's within your budgeting and things like that.
It can be, it is something we had not planned for, but we will take it under advisement and we will work towards that, yes. I received the value of that.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Good morning again. So, last week we had the Ministry of Works and Transport in here in relation to the same inquiry. And we heard of plans that they have. Now, let me just put out there what the end goal of all of this is in relation to the plan. It's probably in there. So the idea behind it in terms of executing is that we have the data in relation to rainfall as it's coming. We know where all the water courses are and the corresponding floodplains. We are aware of all of the communities that would fall into those floodplains. There is warning that goes out, as spoken to by the Ministry of Public Utilities, and the corresponding communities will take necessary precautions to reduce any damage that may occur in relation to that flooding. And you go even further to have your alleviation methods put in place. So we heard from the Ministry of Works and Transport what they are doing. So they are doing a GIS map identifying all of the water courses in Trinidad and Tobago and the corresponding floodplains. I'm also hearing of the web-based app that's in the beta stage from Ministry of Public Utilities, and I'm wondering if all of this is in conjunction, as the chairman alluded to, with each other. So have you spoken to Ministry of Works and Transport and the models that they are building in order to feed that into your app, or did you collect data separately?
Member, as I would have indicated before, we are speaking with a number of stakeholders, the Drainage and Highways Division being just one of them. We also are speaking with the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government. So we are taking all of that data to feed into our portal, right? So that we have accurate data and data that makes sense to, as you say, inform the public and give them the opportunity to take those mitigating measures in the case of an event.
All right, so the reason I asked that question is because the Ministry of Works and Transport indicated that they weren't ready, and that the models that they're trying to build out, the GIS mapping and whatnot, has to be upgraded because what we have now is relatively old, and obviously climate change is a factor that's being played out. So those models have to be updated. So when you're talking about a beta-tested web app, that's why I'm asking about that information, because one of the questions we asked them specifically was the upgrading of that data, to which they indicated, yes, they're in that process, so that they will have that updated map, because the floodplains are going to change. It's not going to be the same floodplains as 50 years ago. So as much as you are working with other entities now, the question arises, how accurate is your data? If they are doing something that's trying to update that now, and they are not ready to actually put forward that map.
Member, perhaps I can ask the WRA to give you a bit more of information concerning how that portal is actually being developed and tested. That may help.
Thank you very much. Keith Mead, Senior Manager, Water Resources Agency. The portal was developed actually in-house. It's in the testing stages, as PS mentioned. It was actually developed because we were looking for some software that could meet the needs of presenting the data that we were collecting, which is data on rainfall and stream flow, to make that data readily available to our stakeholders and to make that data available in a timely manner so that the necessary responses could be put in place in a timely manner. We did not find anything that was suitable for us, and so we did that in-house. So we are testing it at the moment. We have provided the site to various stakeholders, such as our main partner in the process, which is the Ministry of Rural Development, and their DMUs, also to the Drainage Division, and also the University of the West Indies, and several other stakeholders, so that they can look at it and let us know whether it meets their needs or what changes we need to make. So it's actually it's actually a work in progress, which we hope to have completed within the next 2 to 3 months, have it finalized and available to the other stakeholders.
For the benefit of the public, the viewing public, could you probably just explain in a little more detail when you say it's in the beta phase? What do you mean?
That is to say that we are actually testing it to ensure that it works well, that there are no issues with it, that the information that is being transmitted is actually, as was mentioned by you, reliable information, and that information can in fact be used by the various response entities in order to respond, and also the community members also. So basically what it displays actually is an information display system, provides you with information on the rainfall and also the levels of the streams that are in various areas. So what we are hoping to do is to, as I mentioned before, work together with the Ministry of Rural Development, who is our major partner, is to equip each regional corporation, that's the municipal corporations, each of them with information from their particular areas on rainfall and stream flow that they can use so that the citizens could be warned if there is a possible flood, and so that they could take the necessary actions to mitigate that.
Can I just ask, through you, Mr. Chair, I like the fact that you could do the rainfall and the stream flow and sort of predict the possibility of a flood. Does your model or your app, able to tell exactly how large the floodplain would be? Which is something different. Rainfall is fine. Height of the water in the river is fine. But there's something called a floodplain, which is the water breaks the banks and it spreads. Does your app take into account for that?
Well, what we do is, this is another component of the project. And we've been doing this work at the Water Resources Agency for quite some years now, and that is to map. Every time a flood occurs, we try to map the extent of that flood and also to collect the information on the rainfall that resulted in that particular flood. So what we do is that every year when a particular area floods, we will map that area. We have instruments there, and we'll map the height of the flood waters. That's placed on a map, and that is used for, whenever another flood occurs, compare the rainfall and have some idea as to the extent that this particular flood would be.
That is actually very good, because then you're able to build out your predictive models going forward. So then were you aware at all that the Ministry of Works and Transport was trying to do something similar?
No, we weren't aware of that.
And that leads back to my first question, because I'm looking at the duplication. We're all trying to get to the same end goal, but I'm wondering if there's some duplication, because if the ministry is trying to do a map, a GIS map of Trinidad and Tobago, it sounds to me that you already have a lot of the data that they might be looking for to put into that map and whatnot. So that's just, I wanted to make you aware that even though we're trying to get to a particular end goal, in terms of the execution of preventative measures when floods happen, that there may be some duplication taking place between the agencies in terms of collecting data and what you're trying to build.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to all. Before I ask my specific question, I just want to follow up on what my colleague, Nigel Freitas, referenced a short while ago. And Mr. Chairman, I believe that maybe one of the recommendations very early that we should consider, based on what has transpired, is the need for some kind of coordination among these various agencies and authorities to avoid exactly what Mr. De Freitas has said, unnecessary duplication, because there is no coordination that is existing or probably taking place in the way that it ought to. I just wanted to make that point very early. I want to address a question to the Ministry of Planning and Development. That is the agency that is responsible, that is the Town and Country Planning. No, I'm dealing with Ministry of Planning and Development. Yeah, Ministry of Planning. I would like to ask the following. We observed in your observation where you spoke to the issue of planning, permission is granted for development subject to a number of conditions. And you proceeded to outline some of those conditions: design and installation of infrastructure, design and layoff of drainage, design and layoff of devices for prevention and protection against fire, among others. Could you share with this committee which entity evaluates developments to determine if conditions are met? Is it the Town and Country Planning Division?
Thank you, Mr. Member. Yes, the more comprehensive response will be provided by the Director of Town and Country, but the process is that an applicant would come into the Ministry of Planning with their application for construction building, and the response of the Town and Country Planning, based on the information that we would gather from the field work and from information that we would have about the particular site, there would be conditional, what we call conditions of the approval process. The Town Country Planning does not give the final approval. The process is now taken when the applicant is given the permission. It goes to the other entities, which would be included the local government authorities. But sometimes, as in the case of, if it is in a flood-prone area, an area that is high risk, the Ministry of Works and Transport is also included in terms of one of the conditions, in terms of drainage and drainage advice. So I pass on to the Director of Town and Country.
Good morning again. So the PS was accurate. The process would start with the Town and Country Planning Division, and as you are aware, we would determine on land use. After we approve something and we subject it to conditions, it is our way of saying that the expertise for that particular thing does not reside with us. and we then refer you to the particular agency, division, unit that has that expertise. So we will give the example of drainage division. So when we condition that the developer get the approval from drainage division, they will then take their plans to the drainage division and ensure that they follow the recommendations given by the drainage division. They may have proposed recommendations, and then the drainage division would assess those recommendations. It is important to realize in terms of the entire process that at the end of the day, the relevant regional corporation or municipality will not give a completion certificate until everything is done exactly the way that it has been conditioned. So that is just an idea of what the process entails.
But who in the final analysis, or which agency in the final analysis will determine whether all the conditions have been met, even though you have to go to different agencies for approval? Which agency would have the overarching final responsibility to sign off and give ultimate approval for the overall permission for development?
That would be the responsibility of the relevant regional corporation or municipality. They have the final say. That's why it's called a final construction permit. It's a permit that you get only at the end of the entire process.
So it does not come back to?
No, it does not.
It goes to?
Yes.
Let me just ask another question, Mr. Chairman. We have had a lot of flooding in this country, as you're well aware, brought about by indiscriminate dumping, unplanned development. You made reference in your submission as ministry to a national hillside development policy that is being considered by the ministry. Could you provide this committee with a status report or position on this national hillside development policy? Where are we with that policy?
May I?
Yes, and as you're on that point, because it's a very straightforward one, you may want to look at answering this one as well. In this policy, given its status, is consideration being given to addressing issues of deforestation and slash and burn in this slash and burn that we have taken place on the hillsides? Would that be taken into account in this hillside policy, national policy?
With regards to the status of the hillside policy, we did some additional work. So years ago, we did have a hillside policy, but it was the Northern Range hillside policy. We are currently, that is the division, currently revising the document. We've done some work, and it is before the executive for consideration, because now we want to provide a document that is not only focused on the Northern Range, but on the entire country. So it's under revision, let's just say. It's being considered by our executive. That's the status of it. With respect to, or with regards to the issue of slash and burn, it does not necessarily fall under our purview, because that's a matter for forestry division. And in some cases, maybe even the Ministry of Agriculture and the Commission of State Lands, depending on where such activities are taking place. But because we do collaborate with our sister agencies, they provide us with data about particular areas that are especially sensitive. And having provided us with that, then our recommendations will differ depending on the particular local area. So there might be a general hillside policy, but we are very specific when it comes to each relevant area. The standards will change accordingly and appropriately.
Committee, can you tell this committee how long this National Hillside Development Policy was submitted to the executive.
Please forgive me, I'll have to be flapping through notes at this point in time to be able to do so, but before the end of this submission, I'll be able to tell you that.
Do you anticipate, is this policy, are you recommending that this policy be put out for public comment so that the various stakeholders would have an input before it become final policy? Is that part of the submission?
That's exactly how we did the first policy, first time around. All our sister agencies first came together and crafted the policy. In my opinion, it was a pretty good document. And then we put it out there. And I see no reason why we would not consider using the same process this time around.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Again, good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for the submissions that you all made. I understand flooding in terms of being in a constituency that have been consistently ravaged by floods since 2016. And the question my constituents ask is, why does it continue to happen? And from my understanding that there are two parts of it, you have the parts that we can control, and then there's the part that we can't control. So the climate change issue, the rainfall intensity issue, those things I think we have a little less control. But the parts that we can control in terms of our issues around planning, our developments, hillsides, quarrying, deforestation, all those things, we have some control over it. In the response from the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government, the first question, or the first comment that I want to bring to your attention in your submission, you indicated that it is the responsibility of the Ministry of Planning and Development to ensure that the Tongue and Country Planning Division Act is adhered to in the approval process of developments, and that these developments made to facilitate adequate drainage, size of drainage, retention system, etc. But that is in, I would say, a sharp contrast to what Ms. Hines has now said, where she has indicated that the final authority lies in the Ministry of Rural Development, by extension, the municipal corporation. Is that, in terms of your response, is it a case of trapping and passing that responsibility? Because if the municipal corporations are not doing the control part or the enforcement part, how would we start working towards dealing with controlling what is happening? And clearly between the ministry and then, the Rural Development Ministry and Planning, there seems to be some disconnect as to who has that responsibility. So the question is to Ms. Bascom. I know that municipal corporations have that final responsibility. Why is it not happening? And every month, every 2 months, you see something in the newspaper about an unplanned development, another illegal quarry shutting down somewhere. Why is the enforcement not happening at this time?
Vice Chair, you have identified a critical responsibility of the municipal corporations. As part of my team here this morning, both of my deputy PSs were actually CEOs at several corporations. So I would ask Mr. Jamil Chedi Amiral to give you a real life version of what actually happens in a corporation. Jamil?
President, good morning. Jamil Chedi Amiral, Acting Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government. Mr. Chairman, I would have examined the response that was submitted to this committee. The response was submitted in April of this year, and I am not very comfortable having read this response, which indicates or suggests to the committee that the facility for these developments are made to facilitate adequate drainage, adequate sizing of drains, retention systems, and detention systems, etc. So I will want to probably try and see if I could correct the record here now to be consistent with that of Town and Country Planning Division and the member, the vice chairman. So in fact, the regional corporations are the final approving agency to its local authority, which is defined as the Council of a Corporation. However, upon approval for full planning permission, Town and Country Planning Division will usually indicate conditions which requires fire, drainage, water, and so on approval. Of which drainage is one of the approval, design drainage approval is required from the Ministry of Works and Infrastructure or Works and Transport Drainage Division. Having received the approval for design drainage, the corporation or the municipality will in fact convey their approval subject to other approvals from other statutory agencies. And it will be the responsibility of the drainage division to monitor, because they, at the end of the development, they will be required to submit to the developer a document or a letter indicating that they have satisfied the requirements of their drainage design approval granted. And having received that approval or that letter from the Ministry of Works Drainage Division, the corporation will usually accept that. The corporation will do inspections during the period of development and make their observations and probably bring it to the attention of the Drainage Division and the developer if they identify that there are some shortcomings with respect to the drainage design and what is actually being constructed. So I take the point that we are, the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government, through its municipal corporation and regional corporation, are in fact the entities to grant the final approval. And the other aspect with respect to enforcement, Mr. Chairman, yes, we will admit that enforcement on developments and also that for unauthorized structures are a bit tardy, but one can advance quite a number of different reasons that could be allocated to that enforcement issue. The first issue I would want to indicate with respect to enforcement, Mr. Chairman, is the fact that the municipal corporations, corporate office holders, which will be the councillors who really sit around council to make the decisions, sometimes they look at things objectively and differently from a community perspective. And the fact sometimes that their offices might be in structures that might not be authorized themselves, they may not want to probably enforce that authority that they have to really, enforce upon developers. There are also another reason with respect to the adequacy of staffing and capacity and capability of the corporation to undertake full and complete inspections during the course of construction of developments. And you find sometimes that developers do their developments and there are very little inspection because of that lack of capacity and capability at the regional corporations. So basically, that's two of the reasons I can probably immediately advance with respect to the lack of enforcement with respect to division. But I want to make the point that bulldozing and filling of land is determined to be engineering works carried thereon. And the Ministry of Planning and Development may have a role with respect to enforcing, with respect to bulldozing of land and filling up of land for the purpose of laying out land into building lots. And also the EMA may have a responsibility with regards to the designated activity order if they exceed a certain amount of land in terms of the development. So, thank you.
Ms. Hines, just if I could just ask, Mr. Amarelli just spoke that you may have some legal power to do stop orders. I'm just using that phrase. Does the Town and Country Planning, in terms of your enforcement power, can you go on and stop some of these developers, stop some of these activities from happening based on the legislative power that your organizations may have?
Unfortunately, currently we do not have the power for stop orders, but we do have a role in enforcement. And I think my colleague would appreciate, we both know very well that the same challenge in the regional corporation is the same one that we have in terms of human capacity. In the year 2013, 2013, I think, is when we started our enforcement unit. We had to find separate and apart officers because development control inspectors who were responsible for doing site visits on regular applications were becoming overwhelmed. It was too much for them to take note of infringements. So we hired a number of officers, and at present we really only have 12 enforcement officers who are responsible for taking note of infringements and going through the process. You may appreciate that it is a very time-consuming process, and that's why as much as 4 years is given before something is considered statute barred. It is because there is an understanding that the research must be accurate, and it takes a lot of time. I have data that can show that there has been quite a bit of improvement from Town and Country Planning Division in terms of its role in doing enforcement, but I would be lying to not acknowledge that collaboratively, I am talking about, there are many agencies who have officers with some kind of power to do enforcement. The EMA has police, the regional corporations you just heard have officers who are also mandated to do that. Town and Country, yes. You have forestry officers who are aware of things that may happen. You have public health officers. So we at the Ministry of Planning have been thinking, I can't say we have yet taken it further, but the idea is why, if we are all suffering from lack of staff, why don't we ensure that there is some training taking place so that when officers go out there, they see many things, not just those who see infringement in terms of development standards. That would be the development control inspector under the Town and Country Planning Division, but there are others who go out to see other things. So if we were to do some training, that would empower us to increase our numbers. And that is exactly the thinking behind the Planning and Facilitation of Development Act. When we do fully proclaim, that's the kind of thinking that we want to implement to see if we could improve this issue of enforcement.
Thank you, Ms. Hines. I'd like to just bring in Dr. Cooper in discussions here. And first of all, Dr. Cooper, to thank you and the university for your very detailed reply, very incisive response to the questions that we ask. And one thing that stands out from a non-engineering point of view, when you in your response to the challenges, what are the challenges with implementing flood alleviation and control measures? And you identified apathy as one of the reasons. And the response tends to suggest that, you know, the public has reached a stage where there's an attitude of acceptance. Look, like we really just can't solve this problem at all. And they're just like in a state of giving up. And well, fortunately, it hasn't reached the level of the agencies as yet in terms of that apathy. But could you elaborate on that a bit? And the second thing is that in your responses, you know, you refer a lot to integrated water management resource approach, that all the approaches to flood alleviation should really be based on integrated stormwater management approach. And we did ask you to respond to your, in terms of the setting up of a water resources management authority. And bearing in mind, you know, we have so many agencies working within ministries and on separate things. And as identified, you know, coordination seems to be a really challenge, a big challenge. Whether a water resources management authority could really work towards, it could be a coordinating body playing a major role in flood alleviation and control.
Okay, thanks again. So the first point about apathy. During the various visits to sites that have been flooded, I'm always surprised to find out what people are going through for such a long time, to the point where they almost don't think that there is any need to change because the experiences are going to continue. And I was surprised, for example, to find out that in El Socorro, people actually have boats and they have it available and they almost use it on an annual basis because that is the experience, that is their life experience. They live that from year to year. And it seems as if they have realized that this is how it's going to be, and I might just as well adapt. The point about changing apathy, though, is really to start making the problem a little bit more, I guess, real, so that people would realize that it doesn't have to be so. And in fact, only if people begin to demand more would I think that leaders would begin to realize that, you know, there is something that I have to do because so many people are in fact complaining about this particular issue. And so somehow, I think in my opening remarks I talked about public education, and it's really about getting that message across, that it doesn't have to be so. Now, it is very likely that we're going to get floods more frequently. It's climate change, and I always mention climate change, but I don't stop at climate change because another part of the problem that we have had, we are experiencing, is because of our land use practices. Right? And I remember being in the Drainage Division in 1985, and we were talking about, you know, all the siltation and having to desilt the rivers, and it was always because of our land use practices. It was land use practices then, but on top of that, we now have the climate change. All right, so it's you know, we are really we're really in a bind. And, you know, the approaches, we have to sort of figure out how we're going to move forward. But we cannot but help realize that if we are not addressing land use changes, land zoning policies, then we're going to continue, you know, in a downward spiral. With respect to Water Resources Management Authority, it's really about the integration of the issue about water and water as a resource. So we have floods, but floods is not waste, it's not water that we cannot use. We have to find a way of harnessing that water that is available. And it is necessary, I believe, to have that kind of coordinating body which would be able to provide that kind of role to ensure that what is access for the Drainage Division, in fact, becomes something that is available to WASA and, you know, and for Ministry of Agriculture as well. And I would like maybe just to add that if we start thinking of Drainage Division, if we keep tagging that name on them, it's really about getting rid of water. So perhaps a better name, and we should start thinking about it, is really stormwater management. Okay, so maybe we should start thinking in that way.
Yeah, I think the term that comes up a lot based on some responses, particularly from the university, is integrated stormwater management. And actually the Ministry of Planning, the Ministry of Public Utilities refer to a National Integrated Water Resource Management Plan as well. So integrated stormwater management, yes, we concur with that. What is happening is that we have to finish at 12:15. And it's a bit challenging. We have so many stakeholders here. And there is a definite possibility that we'll have to call back some of you all because we still have a fair amount of questions that we would like to ask. But seeing that we have the representatives from the Tobago House of Assembly here, I would like to bring them into the discussion because getting you all to come back again is going to be quite, well, expensive as well for you all to journey back to Trinidad and all of those things and the logistics. So for the remaining time we have, I would really like to engage with the Tobago House of Assembly and ask Member Parry to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's fitting that we closed off the last conversation about stormwater management. And in speaking to Senator De Freitas earlier on today, he did indicate that Tobago has never been historically flood-prone because half of the island's hills and so on. But within recent time, we've seen with the excessive water rainfall, you did have a bit of flooding. In one of your responses, you indicated that there is an initiative to carry out studies for the suitability and location of stormwater ponds and other flood mitigation systems in key flooding hotspots is under consideration. Can you give us an idea of what the status of these studies are in determining suitability and location and so on? How far along is the THA with that project?
I thank you very much, member, for that question. Actually, quite recently, as I would have indicated in my opening comments, we saw the challenges we face in Scarborough in particular with the passage of Tropical Storm Karen. And it forced us to take we have to take a more aggressive and, of course, proactive approach, because we have been looking at, did institute a drainage task force that worked very well in terms of collaboration with the Water and Sewage Authority, the Division of Food Production, Forestry and Fisheries, and the Division of Health, to really ensure that a lot of our current drainage infrastructure is up to standard. But following the passage of Karen and the recognition that we cannot continue with the current capacity, we have decided to go ahead with the studies. Just last week, the approach was approved by the Executive Council, and I would like to invite the Senior Technical Coordinator, Mr. Abdullah Chadban, to give some more details on what the study would entail.
Good morning and thank you, Honorable Chairman. Right. The initiative seeks to engage the UDCOT to provide us with the project management and the procurement systems necessary to acquire the services of consultants that are properly skilled to perform particular studies for our instances. Predominantly, we've had systems that worked, but with the increases we've seen in intensity and volume, one of the things we recognize is that we may have to delve into the inclusion of additional systems, example, stormwater ponds in key areas that have been flooding. I would also piggyback on the current situation. We are also seeing circumstances that were fairly unique, and there's no telling whether they would occur again, so we have to plan for them. Take, for instance, in Scarborough, there were video clips, social media, and on the news. It was very clear that the systems were overwhelmed. But we were faced with a very unique circumstance at that time. There was an occurrence of spring tides. It's a natural occurrence where you have excessively high tides during that period, and then it reduces to excessively low tides. So, coupled with the intensity of the rainfall, the volumes, most of the drainage infrastructure in Scarborough headed towards the seaside at the port area. It couldn't move because the tides were higher than the discharge points. But taking into consideration these occurrences, we need specialized input to make sure that we get the correct design solutions for the occurrence. Because the port is right there, in some of the areas we have coastal communities, we don't want to just go and just do things, the traditional things off we had. It has to be, as the mantra has been put on the table, it has to be integrated. We want to make sure that the studies encompass the whole island and all the river basins, the watersheds, everything are incorporated and assessed. So the initiative really moves to the next stage. We are at the stage where we're going to have an official MOU with the UDCOT. I can say that one of the things that we would definitely include in that, ask them to look at the lessons learned from our counterparts in Trinidad. Instead of reinventing the wheel, we're hearing good things about apps and GIS mapping. Those are things that we would want to piggyback on as well from the studies.
Well, I think Mr. Chadban answered most of the questions that I was going to ask. The only other question I would have is I noticed that the THA was proactive in hiring a climate change specialist, which I just want to commend you for, because, you know, sometimes we aren't proactive in that regard. So let me just talk to the climate change specialist now, because a lot of what we're doing we're sort of reacting to what is happening weather-wise and climate-wise. But you being a climate change specialist, can you give us some insight into what is happening now by way of the intensity of rainfall that we're seeing? Sometimes we have extremely hot days, and what that means going forward into the future, because as someone rightly indicated just now, and specific to Tobago, if Tobago is historically not flood prone, but we're seeing a lot more water coming in a shorter period of time, and that is expected to increase in frequency, then what can we do about that? That seems to be an act of God that's happening there, and we're just trying to mitigate for that. So what do you see happening now in relation to climate change, and what can we expect coming into the future?
Thanks, member, for your question. In respect to climate change, what we have been seeing generally is that the normal patterns that could have been expected in years past are no longer constant. You have occasions now where during periods where you expect it to be dry, you have intense rainfall. And you have occasions where in periods where you expect to have rainfall, you have more extensive dry periods. Additionally, what you're seeing as well is that the intensity of the rainfall is actually increasing. And a classic example is in relation to Karen, where the average rainfall for the month of September for the 30-year period was about 171 millimeters. And in 20 hours alone for Karen, you had 117 millimeters, which is 2/3 of the average. So therefore, these occurrences seem to be more frequent, and the expectation or the projection in the future is that they may continue. In that regard, as it was mentioned before, it's important to identify the water as a resource, not something that needs to be just targeted and exported to the sea. Because if you have occasions where you have a lack of water, whether it be for agriculture or for other uses, it means in the occasions where you have excess water, you could actually use that as a resource that can be used in the future when you actually have dry periods, as well as the soil water recharge or the recharge of your groundwater. All these are things that can be considered in respect to what climate change is projected to do and how we can now use whatever the different circumstances that are existent to now better ourselves and better prepare ourselves for the future.
So what I'm hearing is based on the rebalancing that is taking place, how important would you say, and by important I mean, I guess you could give a percentage if you would like, I just want the public to understand that we keep that storm water, because I am thinking we don't know how long these dry periods could be. And we're hearing of, dams and whatnot being really low, 22% in some cases and whatnot. But then a couple months later, it's flood. So how important it is that we get those mechanisms in place to, when there's floods, we keep that storm water, so when there's an extended dry period, at least we're not really in a bad situation.
I would say that that is extremely important. It's something that has to be priority going forward. And in terms of what Mr. Chadban mentioned, in terms of the settling ponds and so on, dams and other things have to be considered as a medium to actually store excess water when you have it, so that it can be reused in periods when there are less water.
Thank you, Mr. Chadban. Just one word of caution. I think the direction in terms of your river basin studies and all that, in terms of a comprehensive integrated approach and establishing a clear MOU with UDICOT is just a little word of caution. For the past 12 years, I think we have spent in Trinidad $66 million in studies. And I mean, to be fair to the studies and the consultants engaged in the studies and stakeholders, a lot of the solutions coming out of it has been structural. engineering, and of course very high capital costs associated with the projects. And as such, because of that, the high capital costs, it's a stumbling block in terms of implementation. So the studies remain there on the shelf, so to speak. And a lot of the non-structural aspects, the social aspects and what we're talking about in terms of an integrated approach to the whole stormwater management part of it is there. So I thought I'll just mention it to you, that to make sure that the non-structural part, non-engineering part of the studies are well addressed, and they are taken into account in the overall approach to your stormwater management in Tobago. We just have...
just one more comment on top of that comment, as we have both THA here and entities from Trinidad. So in all of what you're doing in Trinidad, so for example, that information that you're collecting, we just naturally assumed you collected information for Tobago as well. So that app that you're doing with the amount of rainfall and the amount of, the height of the water in the river, are you doing that for Tobago's water resources as well, water courses? Because the THA may need that information in terms of what they're trying to do. Or is it just simply Trinidad? Or are we calling it Trinidad and Tobago? Anybody?
May I, Mr. Chairman? Yes, Tobago is again, Keith Mead, Senior Manager, Water Resources Agency. Yes, we are extending it to Tobago. The major hurdle that we have to overcome right now, we lost our antenna in Tobago, and we are trying to reestablish that. We purchased a new one, and we're in the process of reestablishing that. So as soon as that is up, we will have Tobago included in the entire system.
For the information of Tobago, who's here, how soon?
I would say within the next 3 to 4 months, we should have it.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we need to wrap up. So I'd just like to invite the different entities for any closing comments, any closing remarks, and we can go in the same order that when we started off, the Ministry of Public Utilities.
Chairman, members, we again thank you for the opportunity, and we have taken on board the recommendation for close and deepening the collaboration and making sure that the information we have in building our portals and informing our systems is information that everyone is aware of, and it's accurate information. So we will definitely treat with this in moving forward with our discussions with the other agencies. Thank you.
Thank you. Ministry of Planning and Development.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to respond. Yes, we take the advisement on the committee, certainly in terms of a more coordinated rule, but we have recognized that there's quite a complex, certainly very multifaceted issue with respect to flooding. And we also see it not only in terms of guidelines and standards, but it's also associated with a number of other types of policies. We certainly need to look at a number of issues in terms of the containment of squatting. We have to look at the issues of behaviors and attitudes towards how we even manage waste. And of course, we have the whole issue of climate change and even climate infrastructure and climate resilient infrastructure. So there's quite a number of issues that we have to deal with when we talk about. But the Ministry of Planning stands and continues to work in an integrated way to try to resolve this problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Bascom.
Thank you, Chair and members, for the invitation to today's session. Thank you, members of the listening and viewing public. I would like to speak about just one key takeaway in terms of rural clarity on issues of enforcement. That is one area which we would want to ensure that we pay particular attention to in going forward, in addition to all the areas that the other PSs have mentioned in terms of the collaboration and issues of culture change and provision of resources. So thank you very much again from the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government and the 14 municipal corporations.
Thank you, Councillor Divins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Again, thank you for the opportunity to sit here before the committee. One very key takeaway, I think, for all of us has to be based on Member De Freitas' comment. In terms of when we start speaking of national plans, I think it's very critical that Tobago is a lot more integrated in the integrated plans. The reality is, though the Tobago House of Assembly has responsibilities under the 5th schedule of the Tobago House of Assembly Act, it would bode well for us to husband our resources, both in Trinidad and Tobago, to ensure that at all times the information is shared across the waters. We are very much open to collaboration, particularly in the Division of Infrastructure. I must say the Ministry of Works and the Ministry of Planning has collaborated very well with us in the past, and we look forward to all other ministries following suit as we truly make all of the national plans really national. Thank you very much.
Yes, Dr. Cooper, and just briefly in your wrap-up comments, if you could indicate to the committee how much interaction you have with the agencies that are present here. How many come to you, approach you for services and stuff like that?
So Vincent Cooper, lecturer, Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering, UWI. Yeah, so we do enjoy a good relation with many of the stakeholders here. They're very familiar faces. In particular, we started working with Water Resources Agency on that app they were talking about. We are, in fact, trying to provide a little bit more information. I think Senator De Freitas asked about what happens, not so much with rain, but how far water spreads on the floodplain. And we started speaking to Water Resources Agency and providing that kind of information using some models that can take rainfall information and provide the predictive information that they want. Only recently we had a training with Drainage Division, and from time to time we have been meeting with Drainage Division, suggesting research topics, and in fact with Water Resources Agency, just before the start of the semester, we had a meeting which essentially laid out our research agenda, indicating the students we had available and the kind of support with respect to data that we required. And it's working quite well. The Water Resources Agency is providing us with the data, and the students are continuing with their work. So the university is very, very willing to provide whatever assistance we can with respect to training and with respect to creating knowledge, so that we can develop a system that is flood resilient, and we can solve the problem of flooding. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Cooper. I'd like to thank all officials who have come here for this public inquiry, and we will be in touch with you again regarding any further inputs that we require from you. So thank you very much. Thanks for the responses to the questions that the committee has sent to you. I know a lot of work has gone into it, very detailed responses. We appreciate that. I would like to thank members of the committee and members of the Secretariat to the committee, Mr. Masaya, who is the Secretary to the committee, and the staff assigned by the Parliament to the committee. Thanks very much. And I will kindly request members of the committee, if you can just stay back after I suspend for just about 5 minutes so that we can wrap up this meeting here. So this meeting is suspended.